Okay, Yamini, shall we start? Yamini, you need to unmute.
Okay, yeah, and we are ready. So I'm just going to begin the recording.
Okay.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 4th day of the International Seminar on Qualitative, Mixed and Participatory Research Methods. I just want to quickly begin with the ground rules for the session. We are requesting all of you to turn your videos off and your mics on mute for the session. And the questions for the session could be typed in the chat box, and we will come to them towards the end of the session. And I'm so happy that all of you are here, despite the break of that one day we had. And today's session is going to be a very interesting one. We have Dr. Polly Vacklin here with us to talk to us about oral history, new perspectives. And I invite my guide, Dr. Molly Kurvula, to welcome ma'am.
Thanks, Yamini. Respected resource person of the day, Professor Polly Vacklin, dear colleagues and fellow researchers. As mentioned by Ms. Yamini, we are back on to the 4th day of the learning experience on qualitative, mixed and participatory methods in research. Scholars both from India and outside are the participants, and we have the Zoom meeting and the live streaming of the program, and we are very happy that the program is well received with more than 500 scholars regularly viewing the YouTube videos of the workshop. And we also feel so happy to see the enthusiasm among the scholars to learn more about the qualitative methods in research. Yesterday, we were not having a program, but I got more than 12 queries asking for the link to the program. So much of enthusiasm is there among the fellow scholars. And one speciality of this program is that the participants would get an exposure to internationally reputed scholars who have successfully undertaken mega projects of global significance. And as I have mentioned in the previous days, rather than gaining theoretical information, the participants are benefited from the first-hand experiences of resource persons who have used whatever they transact here in their research projects. And today we have yet another eminent scholar, the resource person, Professor Polly Vacklin, the head of the Department of Women's Studies at Guwahati University, Assam. On behalf of University of Calicut and the Department of Women's Studies, I extend a warm welcome to Professor Polly Vacklin. I also welcome all my fellow learners. Yes, this is a learning experience. The research guides and scholars from various disciplines to the day's intellectual discourses. So once again, I extend a hearty welcome to one and all. And now the microphone is over to Ms. Jijila NK to introduce the resource person of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, all. I would like to introduce our today's speaker, Professor Polly Vacklin. Here we have a short bio of her. Professor Polly Vacklin is the HOD in the Department of Women's Studies, Guwahati University. Her area of specialization is gender geography, women's studies, gender and climate change, ecofeminism, and gender-based violence. She was awarded her PhD from Northeastern Hill University, Shillong, for her thesis on gender-related crimes in Greater Guwahati urban area in 2006. There are more than 20 scholars who worked under her on various issues related to women. She has published various papers in international and national publications, as well as presented papers in national and international seminars, namely USA, Singapore, Spain, Sweden, and Bhutan. She is affiliated to various academic and professional associations. She is engaged with organizations and institutions like Uppsala University, Sweden, UGC New Delhi, National Commission for Women, Assam State Commission for Women, Northeast Network, Earth Anders, Arula, IOC, UN Women, OKD Institute of Social Change and Development, Banglanadak.com, etc. for her research and academic works. She completed research project on surrogacy, sexual harassment of women at workplace, socio-cultural, political and economic status of women of Northeast India, and water conservation and menstrual hygiene management amongst female students of Assam. At present, she is engaged with a collaborative international research project as a research consultant with UN Women, Unilever and MC Lloyd Russell on prevention of violence against women and girls program in the tea estate of Assam. She was engaged as a mentor for Assam Care Program of Government of Assam during the COVID-19 pandemic. She was awarded the Gender, Place and Culture Award 2009 for New and Emerging Scholars by Gender, Place and Culture, a journal of feminist geography by Routledge, Taylor and Francis Group. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much for your introduction. And I've been given this responsibility by my very close friend, even though we have met only once or twice maybe, but we consider ourselves very close friends through some virtual works that we did. And that is Molly. And very interestingly, when I call her, she said, "Hello, Molly," and she said, "Hello, Polly." So this is a very rhythmic relationship between me and Molly Kurvilla, Professor Molly Kurvilla. So she requested me to talk about oral history method. And today I'll be giving a deliberation on that. And before I start, I would like to say that I don't consider myself an expert in this field because through my experiences in women's studies and through my in the due process of evolving as women's studies academician, I came to know that there are two types of people who are engaged in the academia of women's studies. One who are trained, maybe they have done the masters in women's studies or they have done some extensive research on women's studies, and that's how they are in women's studies. And I'm neither of them. I became a part of women's studies through my deep interest and passion about the cause. And I started my being a part of women's studies very unknowingly. And that was through my research work, which was again on gender-based violence. And gradually and subsequently, like my parent discipline in geography, and subsequently I became a part of women's studies department in Guwahati University. So my knowledge about oral history method as a research tool is also through a workshop which happened in Guwahati University, and it was conducted by Guwahati Department of History. So when I was attending that workshop, and I found this method so very interesting, and I had huge arguments also with them, because when I had to place my argument regarding how do we place women here, because the word itself, oral history, the history comes in. So history was a huge barrier for me because I was more it has to be something historical. And because the whole workshop was conducted by the mainstream historians. And I did have lots of discussion, debates when this whole workshop was going on, because I understood the method very well, but how can I use it in feminist research? And that really was a challenge for me. And it was a 15-day workshop. So towards the end of 15-day workshop, I could identify very few research papers which were done by feminist scholars by using oral history method. Because as the introducer has introduced me, that I am passionate about, or my area of specialization is gender-based violence. So I really wanted to study about gender-based violence by using oral history method. And it was quite a big challenge for me because there were hardly any papers during that period of time. I'm talking about 2014, something like that. And I found two papers. And with the reference of these two papers, I moved forward. And I wrote a paper by using this method. And that paper got selected again in a very mainstream conference, which was on oral history by the Department of History in Barcelona University. And I presented the paper. And after that, I carried out number of works by using oral history method, because like once that paper was accepted, and because I used my method in a very different way, where the history was, I defined my history in a different way, and it got accepted, and I presented there, and subsequently that paper was published. And I'll share the link of that paper to Molly Kuruvilla so that the rest of the participant can have access to that paper. It's there in Google Scholar, but I'll give you the name of that paper towards the end of the whole presentation or after the presentation itself. So due to make this presentation a bit smoother one, I've shared my presentation to one of the organizer. So I think it's Yamini. Yamini, would you mind sharing the slide, please?
Ma'am, shall I start?
Yeah, please. You can go to the first one.
Ma'am, are you able to see the screen?
Yeah, I'm able to see.
Yeah, okay, all right.
And to all the listeners and to all the participants, I still have the cough of the post-COVID symptoms, so I may cough in between. Please ignore it. So as I said, that I don't consider myself as an expert in this field, but like through intervening or through discourse or through some dialogues with the mainstream oral history method, I wrote a paper and subsequently I got interested with that. And that's how and today I'll be basically sharing my experiences, and not just experiences, whatever information is there in my presentation are actually references which I have taken from different books of oral history. So I'll start my presentation now. So next slide, please.
Ma'am, if there is a lag, please bear with me.
No problem. Yeah. So what is oral history? Like in general term? In general term means how do the mainstream historian considers or defines oral history as? There is some sound. May I please all the participants to mute? Yes, thank you. So oral history, when we say oral history, it is an intensive method of interview with anthropological roots. So even though we say that it is like now the historians have taken, the historians play a major role in using this method for different research work of theirs. But if we look back into the history of oral history, then we find that it has anthropological roots. So it was basically the anthropologist who used this method for different type of research. And subsequently it is also used by the sociologists and historians also. Now, it is not a method which is which has come up very recently. So if we go back to the history of oral history, this method was used very extensively by the Chinese researcher, during the ancient, or more so during the time when they have in the medieval period or as such, they use this method for different type of research to address the social issues. So it became more popular, or this oral history got a new name or new place in the research field was during 1940s. So since 1940s, this oral history method is becoming more popular. So it was used by the anthropologists initially, but subsequently it is used by the sociologists and historians to a larger extent. And when we look at oral history, it has actually created a space of its own. It has created a space between ethnographical research, sociological research, and historical research. So this method is used by different disciplines, basically. So it is used by anthropologists, it is used by historians, and for different type of researchers. Now, oral history, it is said that it is a method of conducting historical research. So if they want to go back to history, and which can be, and those historical records can be gathered through oral interviews, that type of research is considered as oral history. And it is basically done through recorded interviews between a narrator with personal experience of historically significant events. So this became a bit problematic for me because it has to have historical significant event. It has to be related with historical significant events. But when we look at history, where do we see women? We basically see women in the periphery, or they are completely invisible. So this was something a bit difficult for me when I tried to associate my study with history. I'll come to that point, how I used it later on. So it is a very intensive form of research. It is very intensive form of interview which takes place between a narrator and with the personal experience, and their personal experience about some historically significant event. And this is how the anthropologists, or which is used by the historians and ethnographical research and sociological research also. And when this research happens, the interviewer need to have very well informed about, or well information about, on what they are doing research. It may be a person, it may be an event. So what event, if they are doing, for example, a natural event, about maybe the earthquake, 1950 earthquake, which created huge disaster. So the interviewer need to have a very strong information about that event. And if they have information, very well informed information about that event, it becomes easier for the information to it becomes easier for the interview to take place. Another important thing, or another interesting aspect about oral history is that they have a specific reason why oral history is done. Basically, the historian have a specific reason so that whatever information is gathered, this will add to the historical record. So that is the goal. That is the goal of oral history method, that whatever information they gather through oral history, that adds to the historical record. So these are the general terms. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, as I say, can we go to the next slide, please?
Ma'am, unfortunately, there's a lag that we've been experiencing.
Yeah, it's okay.
So sorry.
Okay. Now, this is a very crisp and very well-defined definition about oral history, that in oral history, one uses interview to uncover the past, use it for the present, and preserve it for the future. So there are various things in the past which are not been covered as they should have been. This is a map. Through this method, we can uncover the past and we can use it for the present. I've used this phrase for my own understanding, and preserve it for the future. So this is the main reason for which oral history method is used. And another thing about the oral history is that how far you can go to the past. There are certain limitations. You cannot, one cannot study about some incident which happened maybe 600-700 years ago, because it is about memories. So memory is the core of historical research. So how far that memory can go, and on the basis of that, oral history method can be used. For example, if I'm interviewing a person and I want to know about, from that person's perspective, I want to know about what did she get to know about any event, historical event or any other event, from her grandmother. So in that way, we can go up to 150 years, sometimes 170 years, 80 years to that point. But you cannot, by using oral history method, one cannot go very far or far deeper into the historical event. We can go deeper, but we cannot go very far to the past, because it depends on oral method and it depends on the memory. So memory is the core of oral history. So you go back to the past, ask the person about his or her memory, and then from the narration, you extract the meaning. You extract the meaning, and later on, and by extracting the meaning, you use it for your own understanding or for your own analysis and contextualizing it. And this stays back as preservation. You can archive it, or you can also publish it, which stays as a record. So basically, oral history method is used by the historians to go back to the past, collect information through oral means, past which is not very far, but up to 100, and I've seen research which has gone up to maybe 180 years. So you can go back to that period through oral history method. Whatever information is extracted, they use it, they publish it, they use it, and maybe in the form of books, or sometimes they don't publish it, they just preserve it. And when they preserve it in archives. So oral history method is used extensively for archival purposes. So if we put it in a very simple way, oral history, it collects memories. So it collects memories, personal memories, through personal commentaries of historical significance through recorded interviews. So here another word comes in, which is very important, that is the recorded part. So oral history needs to be recorded. So one needs to have very good recorders to record it. And why recorders are required? So that every nuance of the interview is properly recorded. I'll come to that point once again. So record it. It is oral history, like one cannot go to the field and interview someone, jot down the points, and come up with some sort of extracted information. That will not be oral history. In oral history, every word, every nuance, every sign, even the silence needs to be recorded. So recording plays a very important role in the oral history method. Now there are 4 key elements of oral history work, that is preparation, interviewing, preservation, and access. So before using the method, one need to prepare it. So as we go for literature review, it is something like that, but far more intensive and far more narrower. So one needs to prepare. So how do they prepare? They read, they collect information, they collect data, they read reports, collect reports about the event, then do the interviewing, then they do the interview, then they preserve it. As I said, preservation in the form of archives, and later on they access it. So for us, like people from women's studies who use feminist methods, the preparation was a bit different for me. Like when I did my interview, I knew about the people. It was basically a purposive sampling method. I interviewed those people purposively because I know about the personal life, and thereby that's how I prepared myself. I was in touch with them for a very long period of time. I know certain segments of their life which I wanted to probe into and then interview. So my preparation was different. So in other way, for others, the preparation will be different on the basis of the objective and the aim of the research. Next slide, please. So there are certain common misunderstanding about oral history. This one needs to clear upon that oral history does not include random taping. For example, I've given the example here, like for example, the president of a country is giving his lecture and that has been recorded and his conversation is recorded. That doesn't become a part of oral history. And it also doesn't refer to those type of recordings like recording of different speeches, a wiretapping of different lectures, personal diaries on tape, or other sound recordings. No. So those are not oral history. Why these are not considered as oral history? Because it lacks the dialogue between the interviewer and interviewee. Then what about a journalist interviewing another person? Will that become a part of oral history? Because there is a dialogue between interviewer and interviewee. But again, the interviews which are conducted by journalists is not oral history. Why? Because when the journalist interviews a person, they have the set agendas. And at times, the journalist wants the interviewer to speak what they want them to speak. That's why it is very much controlled, which is not which is not an aspect of oral history. In oral history, one needs to be a very active listener, and it is basically a storytelling process. So in journalistic interviews, that storytelling process doesn't happen. And if it is a storytelling, even if it's a journalist interviewing a person, but it goes in a storytelling process, it can be accepted provided they do not have some set agendas or they do not have some prior intention of why they want to do the interview upon that person. So another thing, another important aspect about oral history is the performative. There is a performative aspect of oral history, because oral history itself is a storytelling, because storytelling is always associated with performance. It is the stories which is told by the interviewee. From there, the information is extracted. In the paper where I wrote, I wanted to study how socialization process adds to domestic violence, and also how it acts to their reluctancy of coming away from that abusive situation. So basically, I was looking at why women are reluctant to come up from that abusive situation, and were there any relationship between the socialization process? So this was my main objective. That was the main research question that I was looking in my paper. So I listened to the story. And when I listened to the story, I went back to the past and I just listened to how did they live in the childhood, where did they work, and who influenced them more, and what are the things that they remember, what do they think, what are the things that she remember about that part, which now she tries to relate to with her recent marriage. And that's how I extracted out the information. So the whole information was by storytelling. They were just telling the stories about their childhood, about how they lived in the family, how they observed people, and who were their biggest influencer, and how now those values have become so strong in them that they are not they find it so difficult to come out from that value, and in spite of a huge form of intensive form of abuses, domestic violence on them, they are reluctant to come up. So I that is how I use. So storytelling help. I asked them the stories, and through their stories, I extracted out information. Yes, next slide, please. Now, feminists have uses oral history method. And it is very interesting to see that when I was struggling to use it, I didn't have access to this book because I was very new to women's studies during that period of time, because I joined the Department of Women's Studies in 2011 and I did this workshop in 2014. So within that short period of time, I didn't have access to this information. Now, when I have it, I'm so happy about it. So feminists have been using oral history method. Why they have been, and they are able to use oral history method, because it is a fitting tool for gaining knowledge about life experience from women and the others. Because I think majority of you are doing research. This is what I've been said by Molly, that most of you are researcher doing your research, or some of you are also into different research projects. So as you know, and I think all of you are from feminist or from women's studies background, women's experiences are not recorded properly for various reasons, for which this whole feminist research methodology has evolved. So this tool is a fitting tool actually to gain information or gain knowledge about life experience of women and others. We can ask the women about the stories, and those stories can give us knowledge, and their experience can be contextualized. At the same time, it has both oral history has a political agenda, and feminist research methodology also has its political agenda. So this political agenda, it integrates women with scholarship. We can bring in the voices, experiences, the silences, not just the voices, also the silences can be recorded. The silences can be contextualized in oral history method, and thereby we can integrate women into scholarship. And again, oral history method is based on long tradition of oral transmission of knowledge. Now, for a very long period of this whole like when we talk about oral history method, Indian society also had a very long tradition of oral transmission of knowledge, and this oral transmission of knowledge is used by the feminists to contextualize about women's life. And through oral history method, it goes into a very deep conversation. It's a very deep communication through storytelling. So, it's really deep. Like when I would like to share with you about one of the experience. Like I never wanted to, like when I started my interview with my respondents, I didn't go with a set thought that I look into patriarchy, I look into suppression, but when I listen to the stories, the different types of cultural aspect, different type of colonization, colonial influence, which we see it even now in our part of and in our part of India, because we have the tea gardens. So I interviewed few women who are from the tea gardens. So when one of the women was and those information I could gather because it was very deep communication. Maybe I'll just share with you one such incident, and how it gives us so very different aspects about this creation of that knowledge. For example, she was an Adivasi woman. She was a widow when I interviewed her. and she had 4 kids. And I was asking her about her marriage. So when she was telling me about her marriage, their marriage was very different. So they exchanged the garland, and this is how she got married. So they exchanged the garland, and then she has to give the Ram salute. Then I said, what is Ram salute? And she remembered everything. So she just stood up. We were just sitting on the floor and I was interviewing her. She just stood up and it was a salute. And that's a Ram salute. Then I said, then I tried to relate what Ram salute has to do with the marriage. And later on, I got to know, because she was in the tea garden, salute was something very much associated with the labors of tea garden. And that became a part of marriage system also among the tea tribes and that community itself. But I don't know if I don't think it is prevalent in all the tea communities in Assam, but specifically that community. And again, in feminist oral history method, it lasts longer. And since it lasts longer, one can go into far more deeper conversation with the women. And and through those deeper conversation, one gets to know about the stories, or know about the different aspects of life, which was never asked. Because when I was listening to the stories of these women when I did this interview, I think those stories were told to me for the first time. They never shared that stories to anybody. So, and those stories, or extracting out those stories, could happen because there was very deep conversation, and which oral history methods allow one to do it. Next slide, please. Now, again, why feminists have been using oral history method? Because it is basically a history which is written from a bottom-up position. History basically comes from top down. We know about the kings. We know about the famous personalities. So they are on the top. So in history, the information percolates from top to down. So we know about them. But in oral history method, this knowledge are actually extracted from the bottom up, or we try to write history from the bottom up. We just try to go from down to up, the masses. And again, oral history method, feminist oral history method is both oral history method and feminist oral history method, because they are in collaboration, or they can connect each other very well, because oral history method is also very inclusive, and feminist research methodology look forward for inclusive mode of doing research. And in feminist research method, for feminist oral history method, researchers serve as active listener and felicitator to the interviewed subjects. So they just listen, they're active listener. There is no intervention, and they just felicitate the interviewee or the participant to tell their voices, which were never heard maybe, or were silent or silenced many in 2 different ways. And to extract out those information, to hear the unheard stories, or those stories which are buried with those women, multiple sessions are required. So a researcher often spends multiple sessions with one respondent. Maybe, why multiple sessions are required? Because one need to create the rapport. So you just go and interview someone and they will tell you everything. That's not going to happen. So maybe in the first interview, the rapport is created, the confidence is built up, and subsequently with second or third or fourth session, when the bonding becomes very stronger with the researcher and the research, then the participant talks about, or speaks about those things with which they are comfortable with, or many times they don't talk. So that rapport building is required, and also because after the recording is done, the researcher needs to listen to it. So there might be certain gaps, or there might be certain areas which are still not clear. So they again have to go back to the respondent. Sorry, here I should have written participant. They again need to go to the participant and collect the information once again to fill up those gaps. So multiple sessions with the participant is required. Now, sometimes what happened in feminist oral history method, sometimes the researcher may work with only one respondent. It might be over a period of few months or years, or it might be a handful of respondents. And why one doesn't require large amount of respondents or participants? Because the conversation is very deep. So deeper is the conversation, more in-depth information you get. So the amount of information is more informative. The amount of qualitative, the amount of quality narration is more important than the quantity. So with a very handful of respondent, one can go and it may cover number of months or years together, for which and through which they can collect the different the data or the information from them. So it might be one respondent or handful of respondent, and they can interview, since they have to interview through multiple sessions. So it may be over a period of months or years also. So often what happens, they gain data from fewer respondents, but gains a deeper understanding of participants' experiences. So fewer respondents and deeper understanding, or fewer respondents and deeper information about the participants' experience. So sometimes what happened, oral history method, feminist oral history method can be used for over a long period of their life, maybe for a number of years, they're working on the life of that women. Recently, a few years back, another book which was written on by using oral history method, and it was on Konoklota. Konoklota is a freedom fighter of Assam. So Professor Sheila Bora, she has used oral history method to find out about Konoklota, who is the youngest martyr of India. And she also found out why she is not considered as the youngest martyr, because she doesn't fall into being recruited as a freedom fighter during that period of time, because she was below the age of 15. So she used oral history method. She went to the place it was only on one person and life of one person. And she interviewed all the people who knew her, and thereby she extracted out the information, and now it's documented and now it is published as a book. So it might be over a period of, so it took her maybe 2 or 3 years to find out, to write about Konoklota. She played a very important role in the history of Assam, but we hardly have any information about her. So now we have information about her, and to find out information about her, oral history method was used. Next slide, please. Now, why feminists use oral history method? So as I said, that it is a way of gaining rich qualitative data. And there we get the experience of women not always included in the research agenda. Now, I find it I find this distinction very clear, like how women gets left out in the whole research agenda, because I come from a subject which is still very masculinist in nature. My parent subject was geography. So I did plenty of field works with my master's students when I was teaching geography in another university. So there, the very first question is that, like, we mark it with bold fonts, interview the head of the family. So that very first line doesn't allow the women to be a part of the interview system. It doesn't allow them to be part of the research agenda. But oral history method, feminist uses it because the experience of women can be included in the research agenda, because the experience of women in many mainstream subjects got excluded. They're not even considered worthy to be interviewed for any interviews, for any mainstream knowledge. Again, through oral history method, the feminists, through this method, it can be used as a tool to access the silence. The silence can also be can be extracted out, which has been excluded in the knowledge building system. And also by unearthing and preserving this missing knowledge, there are many knowledge about women who have gone missing, which are not preserved. So through oral history method, one can unearth and preserve the missing knowledge of women. And this was which was told to us when we were doing the workshop on oral history, that if you want to interview someone, do it now. And if you do not do it now, maybe you'll never get that opportunity to interview that person, because by the time you realize and go to do the interview, they'll be gone. So if one wants to preserve this missing knowledge, one needs to be very quick in recording or extracting the information. And this happened to us also, to me also. And fortunately, I interviewed the first director of Women's Studies Research Center of Guwahati University. And after 1 year, she expired. But I'm so fortunate that at least whatever information I have, now it's recorded. So we have the transcript, we have a CD of her recording, and it's been preserved. So if one wants to use oral history method and wants to interview about the past, because when you want to know about the past, you basically go to the older generation or to the elderly people. So if you want to interview them, do it quicker, because by the time you realize that, or sometimes you realize that by the time you go to them, they are already gone. And at the same time, why feminist uses oral history method is to access the personal experience of the oppressed. One second. Because the chats are coming in between and it is covering my screen. So it is to access the personal experience of the oppressed and personalize the experience in a unique way. So this is a best way. This is one of a very, very fruitful way of accessing the personal experience of the oppressed, which we do it in other research methodology also, in feminist research methodology also. And these operations are a personalized operations or personalized experience. And these experience can be extracted in a very unique way by using oral history method. And those experience can be conceptualized and given a meaning to it subsequently. Next slide, please. Now, link between oral history and feminist concern. I've already spoken about it, so there might be some bit of repetitive of the same thing. Oral history and feminist concerns, they are linked in certain areas. First is that they conceptualize a relationship between the agency and the structure. So women's studies also, we talk about the agency, we talk about the structure, and this is where we can build up the relationships. So through oral history method, we can study the relationship between, or conceptualize the relationship between the agency and the structure, and the individual and the larger society. How we can conceptualize the relationship between the individual and the larger society, because here we are interviewing the individuals, the suppressed voice or the silenced voice or the hidden voices of those individuals, and then try to conceptualize it with the larger society. And here again, we can merge the public and the private, because as I think you're all aware that women have been a main, women have played a very, what to say, they were basically confined to the private space, and how we can merge the private with public. This is where oral history also do it, and feminist concern is also concerned about that. So, and it locates the individual within a structural context. So one can study the individual, one can interview the individual, and after interviewing the individual, they can give us, they can contextualize the structural aspect about through the narratives of the individual. And again, what is the link is that how women's construction and interpretation of history differs from men's documents account. So men have documented the history, but through this oral history method, women's voices can come up, and how women can again reconstruct and reinterpret the history. This is where this is also the intention of oral history, and so of the feminists. So the recent how women's perspective can be added into the historical record. This is one way of doing it. Next, please. Now, how is oral history method different from other interview methods? Because when I've been talking about the oral history method, even when I was preparing the presentation, I didn't find, it looked more or less like as though I'm talking about in-depth interview or any other interview. But there are certain distinctions. Distinctions is that it is distinguished from other forms of interview by its content and extent. What are the contents? It has to have some historical event associated with it. So the historical event may be personal historical event, which you can rename it or reframe it, because that flexibility and is provided by feminist research module. And the extent, like to what extent you can do the interview. You can go very deep, like in oral history method, one can do an in-depth account of the personal experience and reflection. So the personal experiences and the reflections, it might be one person. So the personal experiences and the reflection of the respondent, one can go very deep into that. Again, sufficient time is allowed for the narrator to give the history the fullness they desire. So the time is given, huge importance is given to the narrator. So sufficient time is given to the narrator so that they can tell the story to the fullest and the way they desire. And it is often sometimes it can be only one person's point of view. So even that one point's view, even if it's unique, it is considered as an important aspect of research. It's not to generalize. You take a large number of samples and you generalize it. No, even if you want to feel like one person interview is required, one can go and use the oral history method to know about her, to know about her life, to know about the different experience that she has experienced, and then contextualize it. Next slide, please. Now, there are certain fundamental rules and principles of oral history interviewing. First is that one need to do their homework thoroughly. Now, what is the homework? One need to have a very proper understanding about the issue that they are doing it. Be prepared. So be prepared, because sometimes you may have the question, and if you go in a very structured way, the flow of the story may get interrupted. So be prepared, because you don't know what the other person may say. And again, it is related with memories. So certain points, their memories may get lost. So one may use tools like a photograph, which will again bring back the fresh memories. So one needs to be prepared so that memories get recreated, created, or memories are properly stated by them, or it's not disturbed by various aspects. So one needs to prepare that the storytelling, the flow of storytelling is not interrupted. Again, construct meaningful but open-ended question. So the question should be open-ended and meaningful. If it is very short, then you do not get meaning from that open-ended question. If it's open-ended and yes, no, or just a brief explanation, then you need to reframe it so that you get to know more from the questions. One need not interrupt the respondents because they go back to their memories, they go back to the past, and when they go back to the past, if there is interruption, then the whole storytelling may get disrupted, and so will be the information that you want to extract from it. Follow up on what you have heard. So after doing the recording, read it, hear it properly. Again, if there are certain gaps, go back and do the follow-up. Know your equipments thoroughly, because here you have to use a recorder. Sometimes even a video camera is also used. But if the participant is not comfortable to use those equipments, then the whole purpose of the interview it gets null and void, because equipments plays a very important role, the recorder. So one need to convince the participant that the voices will be recorded, and it should be placed in such a way that the voices are captured properly, because there are number of often it is seen that the external voices interrupts the voices of the narrator, and at the same time when the recorder is placed, they become very conscious about it. So the flow of information may not be natural. So the equipment should be placed in such a way, the recording should be done in such a way that it doesn't interrupt the interviewing process. And at the same time, one always need to keep in mind the practice and ethics of interviewing. So what are the practice and ethics of interviewing? So after the interviews are over, one need to transcript it. So when they transcript it, the silence, the sound, the laughter, the smiles, all needs to be incorporated. So that skill the researcher needs to learn how to transcript it. So in the transcription, the direct information, the direct narration should be there. And after it is transcribed, they have to go back to the respondent, to the participant, and give them a copy of the narration, of the narratives. And if they are not literate, you have to read, the researcher need to read it. And if they feel that certain part of whatever they have narrated shouldn't be a part of a public document, that needs to be removed off. So, and consent should be taken, I think you're all aware of, but these are certain things many of us are not aware of, like after doing the interview, after preparing the transcript should be shown to the participant, and only when they agree that every part of the story needs to be included and can be a part of the document, then only it should be used as an archival or a research material or research data. This happened with me because when I was interviewing one of the respondents, she had so many things. So she just poured out. But later on, when I went with this transcript to show her the transcript, she literally said that, please don't add this one, please. And I was so tempted because it had so much of information, which had so much of value to the whole knowledge system. But because she didn't want it, I couldn't add it. So those ethics needs to be practiced. So with that, I finish my presentation. Thank you so much. So now we go for the question answer session, right?
Yes, ma'am. We have a couple of questions here. Okay. So the first question is, before that, ma'am, I should say thank you so much for such a enriching session. I mean, for feminists, I think the personal is political, and to find these missing voices and to explore these voices and give it meaning. So that I think that is very important for our learning.
And Yamini,
Yes,
I would like to say something.
Yeah.
Actually, Professor Polly, it was such a beautiful presentation. And we are also fortunate to get a cool, calm, and comprehensive presentation on oral history method. And I was actually expecting some post-COVID irritations may come up and some cough or something may happen. But it was so smooth and a flow of experiences.
Yeah.
And one thing I would like to tell everybody that the impact is so amazing that my old scholar, Miss Yamini, texted me and she was telling me, ma'am, I would like to do something with the oral history. And she's actually doing her work on women's property rights. And she was telling me, and she's actually into triangulation. She is using multiple methods in her qualitative research. And now she has come up, ma'am, I would like to do something with oral history of the property rights of women way back and all. I am into it. I should do it immediately. So that is the impact of the presentation, Polly. And I know several of the participants present here might be in the same mental state of doing something immediately with the oral history. And luckily, we have so many areas to be exposed through oral history. So many areas are there. And anyway, thank you so much, Polly. It was an amazing presentation. So now we will go through the questions. I think Ms. Yamini will read out the questions for Polly. Yeah.
Ma'am, the first question is from Professor Molly Kurula. How could you ensure the validity when contradictory information happens to be shared by different study participants? What strategies would ensure validity and reliability?
So first of all, I would like to tell you that in qualitative research or in feminist research, we give huge importance to the personal experience, even though it's contradictory at times. And here what happens in oral history method, when they speak, they go to that extent and sometimes it gets exaggerated. And that actually, and that how that exaggeration needs to be contextualized, the researcher have that ability to, they have a control over it. So, so that happens, like, there might be contradictory, and the validity in oral history method, what happens, the best part is that they have lesser number of participants, and it is about the personal experience. So the personal experience may differ, it may contradict. So but if you feel that it is very, very contradictory, then it is the researcher work to put forward the contradiction and leave it to the readers.
So that the beauty of the study lies in that contradiction, perhaps.
Yeah. It might contradict. It might contradict because it is personal experience.
Okay.
For example, when I was talking about my own paper, it was very contradictory because I found it, how can a woman live in an abusive situation, even they have so much of avenues? So I was basically trying to say that why are you staying there? And I knew it is so very contradictory to my own values, but I respected her values. And she said that, what will I do without my husband? My husband is everything. And I said, why are you teaching her? But later on, it's not with the interview, later on, I was realizing, but she has nurtured her daughter in a different way. But why she is practicing it. So sometimes this contradictory may not be within the participant, but also with the researcher. So how you portray it, this is what research about women is, the beauty about research, feminist research methodologies, that contradictories can be portrayed and that can also be contextualized. But here in oral history, what happens? It is memory. So when they talk about the memory, And if there is 2 or 3 people's memory you are taking, and that memories gets exaggerated, or sometimes those areas which needs suppressions, they are said more, because that is what disturbs them, and that needs to be respected, and that need to be also highlighted, which I felt. And another thing, I don't know if this question has come up here, like when oral history method, by using oral history method, a word, the way a word is pronounced, it may have a very different meaning. In, for example, in Nagaland, they have lots of oral history method. So if you, for example, maybe I'll just act it out. If it's very near, you're asking a person in the language, I'm not talking of the interview, the way they express a word it has huge differences. For example, if a house is very near, and if you ask a person, where is that house? They'll say, it's there. So when it say it's there, then you know it's nearby. But if you ask the person the same question, where is that this person's house? Then you say, it's there. Then you will have to understand that it is very far away. So those expressions, how to, one need to be very, those expressions becomes very challenging to be contextualized in a oral history method, because those has huge significance. And for example, when you ask a question, it just becomes silent. So how to express the silence? So those becomes more challenging than the contradiction in oral history, according to my experience.
Okay, ma'am. Valsala Shukla says, truly insightful session. Thank you, Professor Polly. Personal historical event as a form of content in oral history method. Could you please elaborate on it?
Yeah, personal history method, for example, this was the biggest challenge I had, because it's history, and if you take a historical event, for example, bomb blast and what were you doing during that bomb blast? So you take the oral history method, and it's easy to contextualize. Or the earthquake, what were you doing during that earthquake time of 1950s? So you look at people, you look for people who are still living, and they have knowledge about that earthquake. So it's not difficult. But in feminist research methodology, this history plays a very that historical event plays very crucial. This is what I had constant debate with. This is what I had arguments with. Like, that means women are out. Women are not a part of that. They may not be a part of the historical event. Then how do we know about the personal experience? So I found 2 papers where the personal event of their life is historical, according to them. So I use the references of those 2 papers to actually start my own paper, to start the arguments of my own paper. Like so in my, her socialization process is a historical event for me, for my study. So how she was socialized, who were her historical figure in her life, who were the eventful people in her, it may not be historical, but it knows who were the biggest influencer, who were the people who influenced her life in the past. So when I asked I also interviewed my maid. Then for her, the owner with whom she worked, that was the owner with whom she worked from the age of 18 till 8, so from the age of 8 to 18, 10 years she spent with them. So that moment of her life was very historical, according to her. So I used that moment of her as historical event, and how that historical event now has an impact on her life, I use it in my study. So how, I would like to tell the other respondents also, like, when you write a research paper, when you're doing your research, how you validate your STEM, it plays a very important role. And that validity should come through some publication. If you have any publication, you need to go deeper and deeper down and look. This is what I did. I was just going crazy because something was going in my head and I wanted to write a paper, and I knew what I wanted to write, and I was not being able to prove that this is historical. Then I found these 2 papers And I found this paper and I gave that reference of that paper. And from there, my argument started. And that's how I said that, yes, it was a personal life, but her part of her personal life was very eventful. And that she considered it to be historical. And from there, they have written the paper, and that paper have used as my reference, that if they have used it, I'm using it for my own reference. And that's how I did it.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. The next question is from Sabah Hussain. She asks if accounts of sexual violence could be included as a part of oral history. For example, experiences and accounts of sexual violence during pogroms.
I think it can be what happened, maybe even child sexual abuse, how it has impacted her mental health. We can go back to the past, but one need to be very sensitive, because when we talk about sexual violence and all, again, maybe special permissions are required from the ethics committee. And because we are from feminist research methodology, feminist women studies background, so we may not have the expertise to carry out certain interviews, because when we talk about sexual violence, those are some sad and hidden story in some corner of their life, in some corner of their memories. So many times they don't want those memories to come up. So it can be done, but it should be done through huge amount of sensitivity, because it may again cause different type of mental issues if those buried sad aspect of her life is again excited. So one need to be very sensitive, but it can be done, because usually I did it once and I never thought that because I teach oral history method for my students in masters. So I asked them, once I thought that let me ask about their personal life. So I asked them to interview one another using oral history method. I gave them the guidelines, and to find out like what was one incident in their life which they don't want to remember, or what was one incident in their life which they haven't said before. And when I'm talking about that incident, it just came. So one of the child, she talked about how she was raped, but it was good for her that after that she became very strong, but it may not be for everybody. So one need to be very sensitive, but we had to handle it in a very different way. I had to handle everything in a very different way, because she after she spoke, she felt better. But a classmate who was listening to a story became very emotional and she started crying. So one has to be very careful, like when we deal with very sensitive issues, and by using oral history method, because certain stories, they are really not willing to speak.
Yeah, ma'am. And absolutely, like you said, silences are also so important to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ma'am, the next question is from Ipshita Mitra. She says, thank you for an insightful session. So she has a question regarding transcripts. She asks how to negotiate and navigate when the researcher is translating the participants' responses from their language to English. How is consent obtained from the participant in that scenario?
Yeah, this is again another barrier, like in oral history method, or in any other interviews, because in feminist research methodology, when we use any form of interviews, we have to carry out the interview in the language they are comfortable in, so that we get the best out of it. So there is no barrier. So translation is a barrier. Nowadays, there are different types of apps, free apps, which have come up. So those apps actually helps one to translate it, because actually what happens in oral history method, whatever is spoken, it should be portrayed in the exact way. One need not refine it to make it sound more academic. Then the essence of the whole conversation is lost. this is what oral history tries to say. But if certain things are too, like no finer tunes are required according to oral history, but if one tends to change the wordings, or while doing transcripting, they feel that this is the best way, maybe they can mention it somewhere in the research that this has been done for the academic purpose. So that both the narration can be given. And when you're talking about the translation part, there are certain equipments, apps which have come up, which are very helpful. So you almost get the exact part of it. And also when you write it and you again go back to the participant and show the transcript, that also helps, because if they agree to whatever transcription you have done and they agree to whatever you have, whatever they have read, then I think that what to say, that barrier is removed.
Okay, ma'am. Two others have said that the session is excellent and they've never heard of oral history method despite being social science researchers, and it's been very helpful for them. One of them asked if this method can be used as a mixed method too.
No, mixed method is totally different. You go for quantitative, then you go for qualitative. Then after going for qualitative, quantitative, the third perspective that emerged, that becomes a mixed method. Like you combine both, and from the qualitative, quantitative, you merge it together. You may merge it different way. If you mix it, I don't think so it will do justice to what you're trying to do, because oral history method, because you're going back to the past. So how will you collect information about the past through quantitative or other qualitative methods? It's better to go for feminist oral history method, where you can put in certain aspects about feminist research methodology and certain aspect about oral history method. But mixed method, I think it would be, because the whole intention is different. It's the whole purpose of mixed method is different, and the whole purpose of objectives and aims and purpose of oral history method is different.
But I think, Polly, think if you go for triangulation, some other qualitative method like documentary analysis of the past, that can be done along with oral history, perhaps.
Yeah, then this is, and there where oral history comes in. You have a documentary and you want to know people's perspective, or you want, for example, when we were doing this workshop, then we were given an exercise and it was about Sagal. So he sang a song and they were doing an oral history method on that song. So the recorders were interviewed. The viewers of that time was interviewed to know about that song, and his relatives were interviewed to know why that song was so famous and what excited him, or why did he come up with that song. So that can be done. Like you have the document and you use oral history method to know more about the document. Molly, can we wind up, because I have...
Yes.
And there are just two more questions.
Yeah.
You can pass.
Did we go? Okay. Quickly then.
Yeah.
Okay.
One last question, because the students are waiting, because there are people waiting for a meeting, which is from 4:15. Yeah.
4:15.
Last question.
Okay. In that case, Yamini, shall
yes,
we take the questions and I will send them to Polly, and then
Sure,
Polly can answer it and we will share it.
Let's do that. Yes.
So,
And you can share my mail ID. I'm already typing it here. If anybody wants to mail to me, please feel free to do it. I may not respond immediately, but I'll definitely respond.
Okay. That's fine. Because now it is almost 4:20 and her meeting was scheduled at 4:15. And I'm so happy, Polly, that
it's not just our students. Like
several of the participants, they have been exposed to a new method. Oral history is new to several of our people who are present here. And I'm so thankful to you, Polly, because you made it so beautiful and so clear. And several of them are ready to use this methodology. So that's fine. Thank you so much, Polly. So now we are winding it up. Thank you, all the participants. You will definitely get an answer to the query that you have raised here. And I will also be sharing the readings that Polly is going to send us. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. It was really nice interacting with you people. And I really love talking about research and research. I don't know, it excites me. But today, like, International Women's Day is coming up, and there are 3 collaborative partners who wants to partner with us. So I have kept them sitting there. So I will start off just.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, Yamini, we will stop the live record also.